our next delegation is Natalie Smith to be heard with respect to reports 1 and report 4. And Natalie is also joining us in person today.
Thanks for joining us in person.
Thanks for having me. Good morning. My name is Natalie Smith. I'm a community member. I live in the North End, specifically the St. John's neighborhood. And I'm going to start off speaking to item number 1, amendments to vacant buildings bylaw. So first of all, I'm really happy to see some really great movements in the right direction with this amendment. I spoke to many folks in the community in the last few months, and especially those who live next to derelict residential buildings. And there is a lot of fear about what could happen if nothing is taken care of when it comes to these buildings. It's very concerning to see the state, especially in my neighborhood, of how many homes have been abandoned. And it's time that we do something. So I would like to thank the committee and the public service for putting together this amendment. However, I believe that this is only the first step. More needs to be done to ensure that we're batting homelessness in this city. In my opinion, empty homes are an indication of societal failure. We have over 1,000 residents in the city that are currently homeless, and over 4,000 people who are living in precarious living situations. And that comes from End Homelessness Winnipeg. They put out a homeless census earlier, a few months ago. And so it's really important that we are doing more to ensure that empty homes are quickly being turned into living situations. You know, we have thousands of people in this province, and the majority of those are here in Winnipeg on the waiting list for Manitoba housing. And we need more public housing. And I would really ask that the councillors, a part of this committee in particular, are working with councillors in other cities on ways that we can lobby the federal government for more money directly into our city. We know, unfortunately, our province is not doing what they should be doing when it comes to funding public housing. And we know the federal government is providing money with rapid housing initiative money and items like that. So I would really urge councillors on this committee to do more, to work with councillors across Canada and see if there's ways that we can get money directly for that. And the last thing I'll say on this is housing is a form of reconciliation. If the city is serious about reconciliation, then we must do more to help our Indigenous communities that are severely overrepresented in homelessness and housing insecurity. So again, I do support this amendment. I think it's really important, and especially when we have overages in our emergency services budgets, that we need to find ways to mitigate that as this problem isn't going to go away. And I think it's a great first step, but there are more steps that we can take. I'll switch now to report number 4, list of historical resources, the nomination of the West Kildonan Library. I again support this recommendation full-heartedly. I think it is really important, as Cindy mentioned, that we really need to preserve our centennial buildings. As someone who is a little bit younger, I grew up going to a lot of these facilities across Manitoba. We have a lot of them actually right here in this neighborhood, with the Manitoba Museum is a really good example of infrastructure that was built in the late 60s. It was really designed to increase public engagement and community. There's so many arenas, there's so many libraries that have been built because of the centennial funding, and it's really important that we preserve these. And it's also important that we preserve all architectural history. You know, I know modernist architecture for some people isn't considered quote unquote pretty, but it is something that should be preserved. And there's a lot of historical value to that. And of course, you know, like all things, architecture, fashion, they'll go through fads. So they may not be pretty to us now, but I can assure you that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will greatly appreciate having more examples of modernist architecture. And we also need to preserve the history of pre-Unicity infrastructure. You know, the West Kildonan Library was built just before the Unicity amalgamation. And I think it's really important that we preserve that history of a Winnipeg when it was, you know, the core of the city with the different rural municipalities that were surrounding it. So, and towns and things like that. something that's really important as a resident of St. John's is our library was under renovation for a few years, and the Westgate Library was really the place to go for many of our residents. So living in a place like the North End, unfortunately, we don't have as much as the infrastructure that other communities do. The Westgate Library has been a very big hub for the Westgate community and the St. John's community. Currently, St. John's Library is actually undergoing some renovations. We are unable to actually drop books off at the moment, but we can use Westgate Library. So it's very important in the community. And I think it's really indicative that we need more libraries. Complete communities are so vital to healthy communities. And, one thing that I've heard from a lot of people is that people want places to go where they don't have to spend money. Libraries are a great place for that. It provides AC in the summer for people that can't afford that. It provides heat in the winter for people that are struggling. And I would also like to say that as I believe that I hope that you vote and follow the recommendation that we also look at providing more library services to communities that don't have them currently, such as the Maples in Northwest Winnipeg. I know that part of the previous deal that fell through was to potentially move the Westgate Library into the Garden City Shopping Center to help the folks in the Maples who don't currently have that library service. So I think it's really important that the city look at fulfilling what should be a library in that neighborhood. And the other thing that I'd like to talk about is, of course, that, it's really important to preserve libraries because we need more places for communities to gather. One thing that's been really great in the St. John's Library is the additional meeting spaces. So I'm really excited to see that. And I hope that, if we can keep the historical architecture intact, that we can increase things like that in the Westgate Library. But also, it's really important as we move into the digital era of, physical books are really important, not just for our youth, but for us as adults as well. We spend a lot of time on screens, and studies do prove that physical books actually make it easier to remember what you're reading. So the other thing I would really like to talk about is that libraries can encourage people to not be isolated, especially coming out of the COVID pandemic lockdowns. And I think that there's a lot of really good opportunities to use libraries for more youth drop-in programming. And I would actually like to see more language learning opportunities, such as ESL programs for immigrants and refugees, language preservation for Indigenous peoples and languages, and community building. I would really love to see something like an elder drop-in time for our youth in our communities as well. And I think that libraries would be a great hub for this. So I support anything that protects our libraries, and I'm really excited to see the recommendation to support the historical building, historical resources tag for Westgate Library. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I don't see any questions, but thanks for your time today and delegation.
Thank you. Thank you.